The Fiscal Committee meeting will begin in approximately 1 minute.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council Finance Committee to order. We are ready to move along, but Councilor Erickson is not with us this afternoon. I hope she's at a swimming pool or a lake or someplace cooler than where we are in downtown Sioux Falls today. So with that, our last meeting was on February 13th of 2018. And we have some minutes to approve, so I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved, Neitzer.
Moved by Councilor Neitzer.
Second.
Second by Councilor Sale. See, I can't even talk this afternoon. All those in favor? Or do we need a roll call, or do we need just voice? So all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Our first presentation this afternoon is by Chief of Staff Erica Beck discussing the 2017 sales and use tax available fund balance. So it's always good to talk about available funds after our last meeting. So welcome and good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Bear with me here as I fumble through this little guy. So several weeks ago at a informational meeting, then following at a city council meeting, we had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the available sales and use tax funds from 2017 due to the item that came forward to you with respect to the USD Discovery District and their request for the city to participate in funding a portion of an infrastructure project that they're pursuing this year and next year. And at that time, we had made the recommendation that a portion of those of that funding request for $1.5 million come from the available surplus dollars, and we had also said at that time that we would bring back a recommendation to the council for consideration of that as well as the remaining funds as well. So the total funds being available, $1.7 million. We put together just a few slides just to kind of give an idea of some of the projects that we've been talking about internally on the administrative side that we feel are a priority for the city to move forward. Those are split into two different sections, 4 different projects. So I'm going to go through those, and then I also have slides available that we'll walk through these a little bit as well. Also, if there are specific questions regarding any of these projects, I do have a number of experts here with me also, city staff, that are much more in tune to the details of these projects. So don't be afraid to ask questions, because if I can't answer, I'm going to bring one of them up to assist with that. So those 2 different sections of recommendations that we're bringing forward for your consideration today include both highways and streets and as well as parks. So we have 4 different projects within that. The 2 in front of you under highways and streets, we have the $800,000 that we're recommending coming from the surplus funds for the USD Discovery District. So I just want to talk a little bit about that so that this group understands where the remaining funds for that project would be proposed to come from. So as I had said earlier in this discussion, there was a request for $1.5 million in funds from the USD Discovery District for assistance with infrastructure for their project and to move that forward. Because that project is broken up into a 2-year process. A portion of those funds being allocated this year we thought was appropriate, along with a portion of those funds being allocated next year. So you'll see that we're making the recommendation that we fund $800,000 of that $1.5 million with surplus funds. And then what we would be bringing forward through the budgeting process for next year would be a request for general funds of $500,000, and then the remaining of funds needed, which is roughly $213,000, would be allocated through the Public Works Engineering capital program. Also under highways and streets, you'll see $100,000, and that would be allocated to Minnesota Avenue improvements, roughly from 7th Street to 10th Street, and that would include asphalt overlay as well as ADA ramp repairs. The second section, parks, would include 2 different projects as well. The first being $500,000 for tree removal equipment that you've heard presentations on just recently from the Parks Department, and this is for emerald ash borer response and the equipment to start the removal of those trees. $300,000 of that is then specifically set aside or being recommended for use for the Falls Park viewing platforms, accessible pathways, and code-compliant railing. That was made in a presentation to this group just a couple of weeks ago as well. Again, the group overall felt very strongly about bringing these projects forward based upon need, specifically, and then also with respect due to the timing of some of these projects moving forward. So as an example, with the tree removal equipment, we need to get that equipment on order in order for it to be here and for us to be able to move forward with our program and plan to remove those trees starting in the winter. Falls Park viewing platforms, accessible pathways, and code compliant railing. In order for us to move forward with that project and have it in place, early next year we would need to move forward with the bidding of that project now, or as quickly as possible, in order to move that project forward. As I said, I do have a couple of slides here per each of those projects. The first being specific to the Discovery District, and this is just a reminder for everyone. I think you saw a presentation by Rich Nazer, the president of the USD Discovery District, talking about this in a lot more detail. But those 2 streets that are highlighted are 2 of the main streets that would be part of this funding request, along with all of the utilities, landscaping, sidewalks, all of that kind of infrastructure needed to support this project. Minnesota Avenue from 7th to 10th Street, asphalt overlay again, and then ADA curb ramp upgrades. This is a section showcasing that specific roadway that needs to be updated and repaired. The emerald ash borer equipment. This is a $500,000 expense for capital equipment. The Parks Department is working very diligently in identifying the process to get this equipment identified and brought here to Sioux Falls. And then the last being the Falls Park, Lower Falls viewing area, the code compliant railing, the sidewalk needed to get to the specific viewing areas and the viewing platforms themselves. So with that, I would entertain any questions that this group has with respect to those recommendations. But the other thing that I just want to preface here real quick before maybe getting to your questions is, so this is the start of my 3rd official week back at the city, and I'm very happy to be here. But one thing that I've found over the last couple of weeks is these types of recommendations and presentations don't come around just lightly and made up by one person in a room. We certainly meet on several occasions and try to bring the team together as much as possible to make sure that we're addressing truly what are the priorities that the city staff collectively feel like we need to move forward with. And so with that, I would open it up for questions, but just wanted to make sure that this group understands that there was a lot of thought put into this with respect to what it was that we're presenting and recommending.
Yes, I have a good question on the Minnesota Avenue. That's just a patch, or are we just patching a problem? Can we fix it long term?
Yes, we'll definitely want to fix that long-term. In fact, I think you'll see that coming forward with more detail on the capital program as well. Once we get to that portion of the department presentations to you. Long-term, there's definitely plans to do a complete overhaul of Minnesota Avenue from the airport south to, I believe, 18th Street. If I have that wrong, Chad, let me know. But yes, there's definitely plans to come in and do a complete reconstruct. You know, we try not to do that as much as possible. We try to fix, just because it is so much more costly to come in and do a complete reconstruct of the roadway.
Councilor Neitzer.
Yes, I had a handful on Minnesota Avenue as well, and as you noted in the 2019 proposed plan, there's a major Minnesota Avenue from Russell down to 18th Street. At least the design, I don't remember that the construction number was in there yet. It might have been in the out years or 22 or something like that. Does that sound right? I could look at that. 20 and 21 with the construction? Okay. So first of all, is this section of Minnesota Avenue, is there concrete underneath that asphalt?
Good afternoon, Chad Hevey with engineering. Yes, back in 2010, we did an asphalt overlay from Russell down to 18th, and so it was all concrete, and we went in and patched the concrete as best we could, and then we came in and did an overlay, and that was in 2010. So yes, there is concrete underneath that. And
as far as and this isn't like hindsight and beating anybody up, but on didn't we find on Louise that it just doesn't hold up very well, and we generally wouldn't do that in the future, or would we?
No, we did it on Louise. So if we reconstructed it in 2017, we did an overlay on Louise in about 2009 or 2010. That got us several years.
Okay.
But you know, there's a certain lifespan of a mill and overlay, and when concrete is underneath it, a lot of the success depends on what the shape of the concrete is. Now, Louise Avenue, we probably went a year too long.
Correct.
We have had to go back on portions of Minnesota after the 2010 overlay, and we have had to do some minor mill and overlays just in specific lanes to kind of keep that road together. Something you're going to see whenever we do mill and overlays now across the city, we always have to upgrade the ADA ramps. And so the ADA ramps here at 10th Street are done because we did some overlaying there a few years ago. 2 of the ramps at 8th are done, so we'll go in and do 2 of the repairs. 2 of the ramps at 8th, none of the ramps at 9th are done, but they're under design right now. So.
And you led right into my next question, which was the ADA ramp. You said they have to be done. Is that for an engineering reason or for an ADA federal reason?
That's per the ADA. So anytime you do a slurry seal, which is the old chip seal, that's a process where we do not have to bring the ramps into compliance. If you go a step above that, which would be this mill and overlay, that is when they made the determination that now the ADA ramps have to be brought into compliance with current standards.
And when you say slurry seal, would that be like a micro surfacing where they put the really fraction of an inch little layer like they did on Sertoma last year?
Yes.
Okay. And it sounds like, and 7th, I totally support doing something because 7th to 10th Street is in really tough shape. It certainly is. But you're confident that it's essentially the minimum you could do to buy us time until we do the big project. We're not going to put in stuff and then rip it right back out, I guess.
What we're going to do is the plan is we got a request for proposal to go out for engineering services. And once we get that done, they're going to look at this entire corridor from Russell to 18th. You know, if you just think about it, you know, we got a lot of that area has parking on both sides. So now you have 7 lanes of traffic, 7 lanes of concrete out there. The water main, for example, there's 3 water mains in this section of Minnesota Avenue. And so what we're going to challenge our consultant is to based on the entire corridor, where do we need to start? You know, one thought is, you know, it'd be really nice to get 10th and 11th done in 1 year. So once that's done, you can continue that east-west traffic since they're one-way streets the farther you get. So, yeah, I mean, what we're going to do, our plan this year, it could be some of that could be tore out in 2020 and redone. But with the volumes on Minnesota Avenue, I think it's money very well spent to keep people traveling on the street, especially during the winter.
Absolutely, totally agree. And I do have questions on, and I'll defer for those for the other projects, but the last thing is, if you're out there this summer and while you're standing there on like 10th Street, grab a ratchet, take that no turn on red sign down and bring it back to the shop. Just my feedback.
Wait till Heath comes for us to do that as well, so.
All right.
Thank you.
Just a suggestion, take it or leave it.
We get the humor.
Yeah.
Because I was going to throw it out the same way, so thank you.
All right.
You beat me to it, so we're even, I think, on the Brown Bears by the time we're done. So.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the best way to handle this, is if we want to look at each one of the three of these individually, and we started on Minnesota, so that was a good place to start. You're shaking your head, you didn't have anything else? Did you go ahead, follow up?
Yeah, so on the, I don't remember what they call it, the big tree grabber, I guess, whatever. I assume that probably, I would think that parks probably would have a good use for that, and probably in the past it probably would have been pretty nifty to just take a tree down. I assume it will have use beyond the emerald ash borer issue, although the ash borer issue will go on for a decade probably, so.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Kelby or Don to respond to that so I don't say it incorrectly, but I believe that they anticipate this grapple saw being utilized for the life of this project, and then it being somewhat near its end because of that.
Yeah. And maybe more than just ash trees, I guess, would be the question. So.
Sure. Good afternoon, Kelby Maris with Parks and Recreation. Yes, exactly. We are still exploring this truck-mounted grapple saw and would definitely use it throughout the entire response of removing ash trees. Of course, it does have the capabilities to remove other trees as well. So it would definitely be, you know, a utilized piece of equipment within our forestry crew.
Okay, very good. Can you fit it in your current parks building, or is it something where you need the expansion for that too?
No, we can fit it within the current warm storage building at the park maintenance headquarters.
Do you have vehicles outside of, this is outside of the scope of that, but since I asked, do you have vehicles outside right now, or do you just have equipment just kind of outside because of your lack of storage?
Well, a mixture of both. The things like our high rangers and our log loader, things that our employees actually get on to operate. And the forestry crew were stored inside in warm storage, so they're always game ready, so to speak. So if a storm comes up, the equipment's not wet or cold.
Sure.
No, but we do have like our chip trucks and our chippers and our flatbed trucks do sit outside.
Okay, and then my next ones are going to be on Falls Park. So
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to, rather than waiting, I want to do the tree equipment, or I guess my questions aren't necessarily with the grapple saw. So why don't you go ahead, unless Councilor Sale had anything after that, so go ahead.
okay, Falls Park, I had, so who would actually do, there's a nice, picture here that somebody kind of just did a quick drawing of something. Who would actually be engineering or architecting this thing?
Mike Patton from the Parks Department will respond to that.
Okay. And how long does that take?
Thank you, Mike Patton, Parks and Rec. We have not solicited proposals yet as far as who we would have do the engineering on the project, but we've had preliminary discussions with Stockwell Engineers, a local engineering firm that would help assist in the design. And how long would it take?
Well, how long from the time that you accepted somebody's bid before they had like actual construction ready plans, I guess?
That kind of depends, and this particular area is in the floodway. So depending on the circumstances involved with no-rise certification, which is how the project will impact the flooding in the area, it could be a process between like a 3-month situation or 8 to 10-month situation.
Is that anything where Jeff Schmidt can essentially sign a form and you're good, or no matter what, you got to go to the feds?
It depends on what we find out during the design process, but as the floodplain or flood zone administrator, Jeff would be
He would guide you through it, I
have the
take it.
determination, correct?
Okay. And then the other thing would be, so how quick realistically do you think that I guess our portion would be probably approving a supplemental and then approving a contract, presumably. I think that would be what would have to happen for this to go through.
Correct.
Do you have any thought on when you would need an approval of a contract to get this in place by next spring?
Well, our goal would be to move forward as quickly as possible. So as soon as the appropriations are there, we'd try and get our consultant under contract and get design started.
Okay, you don't have like a date that you really, like your cutoff date or anything? You just as soon as possible?
I think we'd like to let the project as soon as possible, and if everything works out, possibly get started on construction this fall, and then it would probably carry over forward into the following year.
Okay, thanks. And that would lead to my final question, I guess probably would be for Erica, so what would be the next steps, and are we going to see supplementals coming in a week, or how would that work?
Yep. So a portion of the timing of this and why I'm bringing it forward now is specific to the Discovery District. So a couple of weeks ago, we brought forward the resolution with the agreement. At that time, I believe, and actually prior to that, when Rich made his presentation to this group at informational meeting, he talked a lot about the various partners that were involved in that project and the funding sources that they were also contributing. The EFTA board does not actually approve their funding until this group also approves its funding. And so we've been working with them on this process. They know that we were bringing forward this recommendation today, just as an example. What I've advised Rich of is that our intent would be to bring forward a first reading and second reading as quickly as possible, even next Tuesday for first reading, the following Tuesday for a second reading, but wanted to get this group's thoughts and recommendations on that moving forward as well before committing to specific dates.
Thank you. I guess, if you don't mind, I had a couple of questions as well. One is with the Discovery District. Have they talked as part of your discussions with Mr. Nacer about 61st Street? Because when we talk to engineering as part of this whole plan is that those turn lanes, as soon as something's built, the traffic's going to really require those, and that's a substantial investment as well. So does he or does the district have a plan of how they'll come forward with those turn lanes at the same time, or where is that, I guess, in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. If Chad is aware of those discussions, I'd ask him to come up here. Otherwise, I do know that Rich has had some conversations with the city in regards to that. I just don't know what the outcome was of those conversations, but I'm more than happy to get an update to you on that. Do you know?
You said 61st. Did you mean 60th Street North?
60th, you're right, 60th
Okay.
North.
We'll have that information at the first reading.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then I think, Erica, my other question is, and I think that the rest of the council would do this, and I know the 3-week thing. Mm-hmm. I think when we set this money aside as part of the council is that we had kind of planned on having a working session of the council of how to do this, but at the same time, you know, the Discovery District project came up rather quickly. Some of the other things, anytime there's money available in government, we find a way to use it and invest it and put it back into play as quickly as possible. But what didn't make the cut? Or where is that, you know, what other things in the CIP did we look at moving ahead of these where these came to the top? And I'm not sure that's a totally fair question, but it's...
Sure, no, that's a fair question. And ultimately, I probably should have brought a list with me. You know, I think one of the more obvious departments where there's constantly a need is Public Works and specifically engineering. That's one of the things that was, you know, discussed very early on in this process was just their needs. Surely, you all know the challenges associated with the bid process, and so this year bidding hasn't necessarily come in where we expected it to or wanted it to, and so there are additional needs within the Public Works, Streets, and specifically Highways group that could have been part of this presentation as well. And I can't outline those for you in detail right now, but I could certainly provide you with some additional examples of things that didn't quite meet the cut. With respect to the Minnesota Avenue project, we could have proposed more funding for that and done more asphalt overlay on Minnesota Avenue. That was definitely a need that was presented by Mark and his team, and unfortunately we just couldn't push that any further because of some of these other projects that we're presenting for you today.
Well, and I think we were surprised by the Emerald Ash Borer being here as quickly as it has, and we've done a great job of preparing the citizens for that. We've been talking about it for a while. It's just, I wouldn't say it surprised us, but it probably occurred in a quicker manner that Mr. Maris has done a good job of teaching us about that little bugger, so I get that as well. There was something I was headed towards the Minnesota Avenue and whether that's a street that is more of a priority than others and how that made it to the top of the list, I guess, because I can list some other places where there are street improvements that are needed similarly, and I don't know if it was because of the traffic. I know where I was headed. See, if I babbled long enough, I usually get it. I'm interested as well, and this is probably more for Chad, is you challenge the consultants. We're going to see with the new county jail being built, with the county building a parking lot on the west side of Minnesota Avenue, that I think there's going to be some safety concerns that need to be addressed as part of that whole Minnesota Avenue corridor as well, that we're going to see people parking in some strange spots because the amount of parking that's going to be required and what the county's is going to be able to do as part of that large project, both during the construction and then long-term as well.
There's this Minnesota Avenue project is very complicated, and there's a lot of different people involved, and a lot of different utilities, private and public, and of course, that's going to be part of this preliminary design, is to figure out how to phase construction. You know, reconstruction is, the most expensive option we have, and once we get into the study, we understand the private property impacts, the private and public utility impacts, what's going on in the area, the jail expansion. That's going to kind of guide us through how we put the phasing package together. And, some of these areas that we plan on milling and overlaying, if we get 5 years out of it, we may have to mill and overlay it again. But at that point, the ramps will be complete, in compliance, and then we can simply do the mill and overlay. So that's kind of the goal. There's just a lot going on. The farther north you get, there's a lot of homes, and they're, the only place they have to park a lot of times is on street. And so we've thought about if we can take that parking off and not have this 7 lanes of street, and maybe get the sidewalks separated from the traffic so people feel safer on the sidewalks. Can we maybe build some small parking areas for these people? A lot of them, their driveways are through an alley. They don't have a driveway that comes off Minnesota, and so they rely heavily on the on-street parking. And so how do we mitigate that as we go through this process of trying to meet all our goals of the project, which there are several?
Thank you. I know there's several counselors in the audience. If any of them have questions, I know during the committee meetings we allow you to come up if there's anything that you're interested in knowing about. Otherwise, they're both shaking their heads, at least the ones I see. Go ahead, Councilor Neitzer.
So I was okay with moving forward, but others were interested in, I wonder how does the idea of somebody wants to have a study that the council would commission, how would that affect, do we move forward with this, or does it have to push pause? I don't know exactly how that dynamic would play out. I guess other than that, I'm very happy to move forward, but I might be in the minority on the council. I don't know. So
Counselor Staley.
Counselor Staley, are you referencing the falls?
Yeah, the Falls Park study the council may want to do.
Yes, and I will, Counselor Starr and I are meeting with our former attorney, David Feifley, next week to discuss finances as far as that safety study goes, because we did think it might be a good idea to do that before we embark on this platform project. Not that I'm opposed to the platform project, because I'm not, but I just think it's okay to look at possibilities for who's going to finance that if we did do it. Sure. And at the end, so I don't know how that's going to play out, but at least we're trying to move forward and get some information on that.
Sure, that sounds good. I would just encourage everybody to move as quickly as they can and just be in communication so the administration knows where we're going and vice versa, so people can move forward either way, I guess. How much will be left after this, if all of this is completed? Because isn't there about 1.8? Or am I wrong?
Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's, what? It's roughly maybe $13,000 to $15,000 that's left.
Okay. And I don't know how often we have a budget or we have a capital surplus, but just as an example, it just by happenstance, this Discovery District presented itself, and it was very time sensitive, and we were just lucky that we had this capital surplus. So is there any thought or any benefit, well, is just sitting on some of it, just holding 500 and let it roll over to the next year and just kind of have a little gravy, essentially if something presents itself or not? I don't know if that's the best use of money or not.
Sure. I would hope, moving forward that those types of discussions, as an example that happened with the Discovery District, we can be a little bit more planned for and be able to incorporate those into the regular budgeting process. What we didn't get to talk about necessarily with the Discovery District is there are other funding sources that we could potentially utilize long-term to assist with their infrastructure needs, if that would be something that the council would consider in the future. And so, unfortunately, we did not have the time on our side to be able to move those types of discussions forward, given where they were at with all of their various funding sources and partners that were at the table. But I do think that there are opportunities for us to be better prepared in the future, and not necessarily with respect to holding back surplus funds, but in being more prepared to come up with creative and alternative funding sources for those types of projects moving forward.
Okay, that's fair enough, but I'm not sure when the last time this may have happened, but so let's say something did come up and suddenly we needed $1 million to buy something, I don't know what it would be, that broke or something like that. See, like it's Operation Timber Strike, I would think that would mostly be operations. We would go into the reserve for that, to do that, because it's just all the employees and stuff, but I don't know, you need a $2 million thing breaks. Now what do we do in the middle of the year? Do we have a reserve fund for capital? I don't
I'm going to lean on Tom to help me respond to that, but what I would say, I guess, in respect to that is that in the past, when those types of events have occurred, the city finance office, along with all the departments, have always come together to try to solve those types of issues. And certainly it's not a fun discussion to have, but I think moving forward, we would handle it no differently than that. But again, trying to be as prepared as possible. And I think the teams do a very good job of making sure that, they're trying to prepare for the future and the what ifs that could arise and could come up.
And I suppose depending on the timing, if a project hasn't been let yet, you could say, well, we're not going to do this road this year. We got to do this right now. And you make those changes on the fly. Right.
And that's happened before, based upon bidding situations that have happened. So
bids and stuff.
We've reacted to the climate that we're in.
So, and my last question is, as far as bidding goes, I watch the bids every week when it comes, and I'm not sure whether I haven't looked at every week at the same time, but I'm not sure if I've noticed a trend. I've seen some high and some low. Are we seeing a trend of high bids that are eating up our budget, or what's going on?
Chad's probably more prepared to answer to that.
Just in the construction world.
I think what you're seeing is that there's a lot of public work between the city of Sioux Falls, the Department of Transportation in this area, and then there's an extremely high amount of private work that's going on with all the construction. And a lot of times, you know, there are some, you know, there are some differences between doing work for private people and doing work for the public. And usually the work for the public entities is usually more expensive. There's just, you know, let's see, I can be building a brand new parking lot, or I can be out doing joint repairs on Minnesota Avenue. It's a pretty easy decision. I'd rather be in a new parking lot than working out on Minnesota Avenue. And so what we've really seen is you're getting fewer contractors bidding on projects, and they know that. And thus then, you know, my number's gonna be what it is. If I get it, I'm gonna make some money, because I'm probably gonna have to work more. I may have to tell other people no. And so I just, you know, when there wasn't so much private work going on, we always had lots of bidders and good numbers, but we're just not seeing the number of bidders. I mean, we just had something a week or two ago, kind of a drainage, a small.
One bid, yeah.
Well, we didn't have any bids.
Oh, yeah, no, okay.
And it was maybe a $150,000 project in a drainage way. No bids because everybody is that busy. And what also it's done, the weather has had a big impact now just because we have lost some time. And so there's maybe things in the private sector that absolutely need to get done. They're willing to pay more. And so the contractors will go to the private sector versus coming to us. So
Very good.
Are we estimating, before you walk away, I'm sorry, more of a discussion here, but are we seeing more things? Are we estimating higher than when we do the engineering work, anticipating that there's a lot of work in the marketplace too, so that, you know, I'm kind of like Councilor Neitzer, I kind of nerd out on, you know, looking at some of those each week and seeing how many people bid and people not bidding. But we've got to be taking that into account as well too, is that we're bumping those estimate numbers up as well, I would think. And that's why we won't see, if we're doing a good job on the estimating, we should be really close.
And typically, you know, our estimates are pretty close. But there has been a few instances where they haven't been. And, but even, you know, that's kind of the, even our consultants, that's kind of it's almost a, you know, a competition amongst them. You know, you want to be as close as you can, but you don't want to be, you know, you don't want to be extremely high either, because, you know, then we're planning on spending that extra $200,000 and the bids come in and they're, you know, now we have that money available. And so I mean, I can assure you that we are watching that very closely, and we are, it's just like this $100,000, you know, we're going to put it to work because the needs are out there.
Thank you. Did you have more, Councilor?
Yeah, one more. And at this time of year, when you're in July, how easy is it to even find a contractor that'll do a road project that isn't, I mean, maybe they book for the whole summer and they're all, I don't know how they do their deals. Well,
this one here, you know, there'll be several contractors involved. The curb ramp, with being 6 of those, you know, our hope is that we can change order that on to somebody that's working in the area, maybe farther down on Minnesota Avenue. We can get them up here. The striping will be done by a separate contractor. We have these contracts open all the time. You've seen them probably in town doing a lot of long line striping. Mm-hmm. Traffic control will be done locally by, you know, a contractor, and that won't be that big of an issue. The milling will be completed. You know, we have a milling contract every year that we go in and mill all the neighborhood streets out. We'll just add quantity onto that. And then the actual paving will be done by city crews, where we're buying mix off of our bid price. So it's going to be a lot of piecemealed, but it'd be you're right. If we were doing this as a one complete package where you needed 6 or 7 subs, it'd be pretty difficult this time of year.
Okay. So we have a contractor do the mill, but then we have Galen's team actually do the overlay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
If nothing else, we can move on to our next agenda item. We have Mr. Tom Huber here to discuss revenue sources and budget projections. One of the things that I've worked with staff and Assistant Director Huber is to give it an idea of where we're at as we got the capital improvement budget last week from the mayor. And then to me, it makes sense to start our process and our deliberating is taking a look at what the estimates are for the future and I want to know what money we have to spend before we actually start the spending process, or at least going through that side of the budget. So I'm intrigued by the revenue estimates, and if you don't mind, I'll turn it over to the Assistant Director.
Thank you. Tom Huber with the Finance Office again. The focus of the presentation was planning on just kind of covering a little bit more detail of sales tax trends, what we're seeing and how we came up with our estimate of 3% growth going forward, and then share a little bit more on property tax estimates. There's a lot of other components to the budget, but these are kind of the biggest drivers, a couple of the biggest drivers to our revenues. So to start out real quick, you can look at the main revenue drivers. If you look at the 2018 total revenues, this is citywide revenues. 45% of our sources come from taxes. It's going to be your sales taxes, your property tax, entertainment tax. 30% comes from charges for goods and services. Those are primarily going to come from your user fees for water reclamation, landfill, electric light, parking. And there's also some charges for goods and services even in the governmental funds within the health department and parks and recreation. But for the most part, it's those large enterprise funds, utilities that drive the charges for goods and services. You can see our other revenue sources, but again, those are the two primary drivers and are obviously going to be our focal point. Going in a little bit deeper into just looking at the general fund revenue drivers. The general fund is our primary operating account, as I talked about earlier. Funds our fire and police services, funds our parks and recreation operations, our health department operations, our planning and building services, our general government, our libraries. And so even heavier focused on taxes there. And if we drill down into that a little bit further, as 82% of it's going to be made up of taxes in general, you're going to be looking at about an even split between sales tax and property tax, 48% each. And this is just kind of a historical look. So those being our primary sources, thought we'd first start by, and please stop me and ask questions. Like I said, didn't come over with a lot of prepared comments, wanted to be more of a question and answer session. But you saw this chart in the mayor's capital program presentation. This is a long-term look at our sales tax revenues. Each one of these blue bars represents 10 years of sales tax collections. So it really gives you a good look at when we put a moving average to it, which is the black dotted line on there, you can really see the long-term trend. And you can see that it's not been a positive trend. It's been a clear shift from the late 90s, early 2000s when we could expect between 6 and 8% in sales tax growth, and now we're in an environment where we're kind of in that 3 to 4% range, lower on some years. So it's really been a remarked shift that we've had to adjust to over the recent past. So it's something we certainly take a look at when we're looking at what we're going to forecast for the next year. This is an awful busy chart, but it really gives you a pretty good idea of exactly what's happened. This is year over year monthly sales tax growth. So each bar represents like May of 2018 is measured against May of 2017. And you can really see the rolling. We rolled off hard, there at about 2008, 2009, were the really tough years, and we never recovered back to where we had been, like I said, in the late 90s and early 2000s. But you can see a slight upward shift now at the end of this last year and a look at beginning of this year. So it's an improvement, and we'll take any improvement we can get, especially when you look at a source as big as the sales tax to us. So this just kind of provides a little more of a stark contrast in sales tax growth over the last year and a half since January of 17, and you could see through the first half of last year it was really tepid. There was, a lot of months with negative growth. It was just really low growth. You can see September, there's been a remarked shift to the upside. Now it's not, going to generate, piles of new money because it's not going back to that 6 to 8% range, but it still gives us a lot of confidence that the trend is in the right direction, and we have some things, the Wayfair case that the mayor talked about, and hopefully the ag economy hopefully will stabilize, but it's not going to go back as fast to where it was, and other things. Inflation is coming back into the market a little bit. We've seen some of that, and that also pushes up the collections. So the last chart is the one you saw in the monthly report, and that this is a rolling 12-month growth rate, and you can see that again, that shift upwards has been a welcome shift to the positive side. So it kind of gives us we want to be cautious. We want to be realistic. We don't want to be overly cautious and hold ourselves back, but we want to make these, realistic and really good measure. Again, are we going to hit it right on? No, we're never going to hit it right on. But if you look at our budgets, year after year after year, we did a 10-year history of total revenue in the general fund, and we missed it like by 0.3%. And again, property tax, a pretty stable source of revenue. You kind of know where it's coming from, but you may miss it $2 or $3 million one year to one side, $2 million the next to the other side the next year. But overall, it's worked pretty well what we've been doing to look forward and try to look ahead and see where we're going. Any questions on the sales tax side of things? Just
Go ahead. Yes, Councilor Sale.
Recently, there's been some developments in Supreme Court with sales tax. Yep. Could you give us any insight on how that might affect our numbers here in Sioux Falls?
Well, if it stays as is, it can only help. We just don't know when, and we don't know how much. And so we know we're giving up some revenue, certainly a chunk of revenue to online sales. Now Amazon is collecting on goods sold by Amazon itself, not the resellers on Amazon, but Amazon itself. They are collecting the tax, and obviously storefronts in South Dakota, Best Buy or Walmart, anybody that you're buying online for that have a presence here are going to be collecting sales tax, but there's a lot of them that are not. And so, like I said, we just don't know to what the magnitude is. There are some exceptions inside of there. I haven't gone through. I listened to some of the Supreme Court arguments, but I didn't look at exactly what the final outcome is going to be as to when this all is going to go into effect, and then at what level are they going to draw some small business exemptions or those type of things. But it can only be good news for us. It was a big win for the city and for those Main Street businesses that are competing with online. I also know we have some online, a lot of online retailers that is going to impact them, on their, having to now collect sales tax and have an algorithm, a program that kind of outlines what sales tax is owed. But we do have zip codes. And
go ahead, Councilor Neitzer.
I did actually listen to the arguments about 3 times, and I read the decision, and so it's very interesting. I think it's going to help, and this is just me pontificating. I think it may help, but I think people may be vastly overestimating how much it may help, because there's so many multi-channel retailers, the big boys, like the Targets and the Walmarts of the world. They're collecting anyway because they have a presence here in South Dakota, and I think it was 200 transactions or $100,000 in sales, I think, before they're triggered, something like that in South Dakota. And then my understanding is it has to be, now that it goes back to the state Supreme Court or the district court or whoever, and then they have to essentially execute on what the Supreme Court told them. And then, so there's going to be some lag time before they start. So, but it will be interesting to see how it plays out. So,
Yeah,
we'll
will
see.
you be able to tell what that real impact is? Because you've got so many factors weighing in on retail business. And we will present a chart sometime on, where do we get most of the tax from? A lot of it is retail trade. That's where most of the sales tax comes from. There's transportation services. There's a lot of other services that are sales taxable. But, inflation's having has some impact as prices go up. Your population growth should add to your sales tax base. There's just a lot of factors that go into it. So will you be able to tell what the real impact is? But my thing would be it can only help.
And all of those briefs, there's the projections, as you know, are all over the map of how much the state is supposedly losing or not losing, because you don't know what you don't know. As far as sales tax, just in general, it sounds like averaging out, the finance department in the city's done a great job of hitting the number over time. But obviously the key part of any budget, when I'm looking at the budget book, is what you're projecting for the next 5 years of growth. Because it's just like actuarial, it compounds.
Correct.
And 1% off or something, you do that over the years, it's a lot of money. So
add up.
that leads into the question, you showed 3% in the first 3 or 4 years, and then it was 4% or something.
Right.
So how do you come up with those numbers? And one reason I bring that up is because even though it's been on the uptick recently, I'm not sure any of us are even really have a solid reason why it went down and why it's coming back up. And so that doesn't give one a lot of confidence in being able to project that, to feel confident it's going to be 3 or 4%. Why not 1%? So I guess, how do you project that? Because that'd be my worry, is that if you projected it way too high and then our budget is, way off.
It has some offsetting effects because you're making the same projections on the expense side. What will our wages be? What will fuel costs be? What will the cost of the inputs be? And so, you kind of balance against each other. So if inflation's coming back, we're going to see a little more sales tax growth, but likewise, we're going to see expense growth. Vice versa. If sales tax stays down, a lot of our expenses will stay down. And I've always said is that, a low inflationary environment, you say, well, it's affecting my income. What I get is a cost of living adjustment, or on Social Security, what I get for a cost of living adjustment, or what I can make in my products. But the flip side of it is inflation can really eat you up in a hurry, and faster than anything you can grow revenue. And so we just try to be very, very cautious and to make sure that we have those factors lined up. I think our trends would show that, with population growth, with inflation, and with some of those other factors, 4%, on the outside is reasonable. But I don't have a crystal ball, and we'll have to adjust as we get there. But the expense side will also have to be adjusted as we get there too.
So if you're assuming the 3 and the 4%, when I'm looking at a budget book, for example, the CIP, and I look in the out years, are you building in escalators? I mean, are you assuming that 3, 4 years down the road, you've compounded, like if it costs, $10 today for the widget, that you're putting in $15 for it, or do you get that granular?
You'd hope we're doing some of that, but we're not trying to, be totally inflation projectors either in those numbers. But they do have some factors in them, I believe, that we're growing off of what our expectations would be on the out years as on some of those projects, so that it's at least somewhat realistic.
Because I mean, as an example, like let's say if you let a big street project today, it was $10 million, but it was programmed for 2023, it's probably going to be 11.2 or something. And so, does the budget book say 10 or does it say 11.2?
For most of it, which should be the higher number, it should be based on kind of what we're predicting to be out there on the high on. But again, we've looked at construction cost index. We've not tried to overinflate any of them. In fact, for most of them, we're not probably even using much of an inflation factor at all. Just trying to look out as to what those costs might be on the out years.
Sure. Okay. Thanks.
Again, it's trying to balance those two. if we get out ahead of it on the one side, we're going to lose on the other side. It's just keeping them moving together.
If you don't mind, I'm going to jump in here a little bit too, but a question, because I look at our overall model as a state for taxation, and we rely heavily on taxing retail. I mean, that's where a majority of our tax funds come from, which is probably the most volatile part of our economy. And I looked at an article from the Census Bureau looking at real GDP growth that came out last week. South Dakota was one of 3 states that had a negative GDP rate for 2017, which, again, playing junior economist that I do, and I have no training in economics other than the little bit that I took in college to get me through. But we look at it, and that's got to be the ag economy that's holding us back. And it doesn't looking into the future and anything that I've looked at that's going to improve much in the next in the near future. So I guess I'm trying to get a handle on how because Director Turbeck often told me that he wasn't an economist and we didn't have, that isn't what we expect our finance office to do. So I'm trying to figure out where those predictions into the future are coming from. I've been part of the state budget in an intern process in college, but watching those economists that try to predict the future, which we'd all be rich if we could predict the future in this whole thing. But I think, and I'm not speaking for Councilor Neitzer, but with his line of questioning, is we're nervous at 3%. Or should we be nervous at 3%? And where's the economists to back us up? And I know we've done a good job and we have a great track record of predicting that. And I don't mean to lay that all on you today, but overall, when we're trying to look at building a budget for the next year and the next 5 years in the CIP case, I think there's a lot of people who are nervous about where the economy's going, especially on a retail basis. And whether, I heard a state legislator who's in charge of the Appropriations Committee the other day predict somewhere between 6 million and 60 million for the state impact as part of the wafer case. Well, that doesn't make me feel very confident of trying to put a budget together for us for the next year. And I know that some of that is lowering expectations, and there's a political part of that as well that don't come to Pierre thinking there's going to be a lot of extra money to spend either. And I think the thing that we've done as a city of Sioux Falls that we've done a really great job is not only taking the growth that we've had and investing that money wisely into public service projects that we do. I think one of the things we talked about earlier, if we tax people, I feel like we have an obligation to put that money in play as well, to not sit on it for a rainy day. We've had opportunities in the past where there have been rainy days and we haven't needed it as much. So what would be that catastrophe and how do you plan for those? So balancing that, and I know that was a little bit more rambling than I intended it to be, but I'm still nervous at 3%, and I don't know how to justify that and to get to that point, because to me that's the basis of how you build the budget, is based on where that, if it's 3%, because you need that 3% to make this, at least the CIP part that we've seen so far, work. So maybe that's a good place for me to quit rambling.
Well, I guess I would say, I think the trends that we're seeing, we're pretty comfortable at 3%. But will it be 3%? We don't know. I'm not going to put my money down. I better off go to Vegas and but I think what we've shown is year after year, we've adjusted to whatever the numbers are. So if it's not 3%, we've managed to it when it's on the downside. When it's on the upside, we set the money aside and we've built up this reserve so that we can respond to a catastrophic event, so that we do have adequate cash flow. We don't borrow against our general fund. And so I just think that the principles that we live by day after day of being just prudent when it comes to the taxpayers' money. We don't want to sit on a hoard of money that you're collecting it then and not investing it back into the community. So it's that balance. And all I can say is that if it doesn't happen as we predict, we'll adjust whether it's on the upside or the downside. It works out. And I've looked at the econometric models too. There's a lot of different kind of models you can play out, but I think even the state would tell you, and everybody that runs those type of models, is that that's what they are. They're models. It gives them some guidance, but again, the best thing you can do is have a good plan to what's going to happen if you don't hit the number on the downside and the upside. And so I think that's what we've put in place is a good plan, and always having good plans on the shelf. You guys have helped us set reserve policies and be a part of those, and I think that's just critically important. So from that angle, I hope the ag economy is also, has bottomed out. It wouldn't take another turn to the downside, that it's stabilized and would have more upside potential. But, with the trade issues and different things going on, it's just hard to say. So, but from where we are, we're pretty comfortable with the 3% number, and hope you would be too, in the sense that, and again, we're open to all the input, but we're going to adjust and adapt no matter what happens.
Makes sense. If you don't mind, we're going to keep you moving so we get done with
I'm pretty
7
well
o'clock. Well, okay.
Almost. I was just going to go through property tax a little bit and be out. Unless you guys had other questions, I'm certainly open to answering any questions the counselors would have. So we talked about the sales tax portion of this. The other half on the general fund side is the property tax portion. And so when you look at the property tax, there's two components to it. There's the growth component that comes from new construction, adding new construction on, and then there's the inflationary component. As you might be aware, we have up to a 3% CPI adjustment. That's the max capped by the state. So whatever inflation is, that's what we're allowed to adjust. And you can see, like for 18's budget, growth was 3.7% for new properties getting added, and then 1% on the inflationary side. This year, we do know that the inflationary adjustment is 2.1%. That's being set by the state. The growth projection, again, we're still finalizing our numbers, and we actually don't get the final number until the county comes out, and that's actually September. You already have the budget by then. But usually we're really well within range there, anywhere from 3 to 4%. And so 3.7% is a lot of times a pretty close number, between 3.5% and 3.7%. So again, on the property tax side, that's the other primary driver to the general fund. Just a quick look at it, what comes from Minnehaha, what comes from Lincoln, and you can see it's almost 75%, 25%. I think it's 77 and 23. But as far as Minnehaha County, who makes up what portion of the property tax, from a county standpoint. So, and that's all we had. The other revenues, you do get some adjustment on departmental revenues. We do look at, we're taking a new look at motor vehicle fees. We had that audit done this year. We'll be pulling that number down. Bank franchise tax has been on the upside and looks to be staying towards the upside, so we might adjust that up a little bit. There's a lot of factors in there, but a lot of them just kind of offset and keep moving. But the other revenue sources look to be on a positive trend.
Go ahead, Councilor Neitzer.
So related to, I guess, property tax, because it has to do with growth, so kind of in general. As I kind of look through the CIP book and you think about all of this growth, we've been growing like crazy and annexing land. And as we grow, as an example, I'm looking at 2 different fire station projects, which I certainly support fire stations. That's not the point. But with growth, as the city grows, we have to build, let's say, a new fire station, and that isn't just the building. You then have 15 new FTEs at $1.2 million a year.
Correct.
And then that doesn't include, now we have to plow all of those streets. We now have to maintain all those streets. There's so many things that go into that with the growth, and I just wonder with this explosive growth, is it going to get ahead of us where we're going to find ourselves where we're now cash strapped and it's going to be too late? Or are we managing it, or should we be slowing down? I just wonder about that.
I can't speak to the managing the growth itself, but we do take all that into account. So when I talked about a plan, we used our forecasting models. We go out 10 years and even beyond in our forecasting models, and we account for the impact of adding fire stations. We know that that's going to be about 1.3 million, I believe, between 1.2 and 1.3 now, and inflated a little bit higher later, to add a fire station on. And so between the personnel and the other operating costs of having a station, we account for those. We account for expanding some of the police force. We account for expanding other employees. We account for expanding, some of the other operating needs. So we try to account for most of that so that we don't get into the trouble of getting ahead of ourselves. And that's something that's hard to get across. You say, okay, you look at what you saw today for the numbers, and you say, well, we got great reserves. We got a solid reserve on the books. We have our revenues seem to be trending upwards. So let's get out and spend. You can't, because you have to be looking ahead to what those projects are going to impact us. And we're trying to do more and more education along those lines of how we prepare for that. So we may be slightly ahead of the 25% target, but that doesn't just give us the ability to just spend that, because it's going to get drawn down when we add a fire station. That's going to be the number one impact. But adding we planned for the Midco Aquatic Center. We plan for every time we add stuff to the budget. So that's kind of a hard point to drive home, that we have to plan ahead, or we will end up like some other entities, which where you get into trouble.
That's fair. Related to that, that's something else that I think about, and I sometimes challenge Public Works, and I don't know if you look at it in finances, the idea that, and this crosses enterprises, where, for example, take my Northwest District, you have thousands of acres that are sewerable now, where we've invested tens of millions of dollars in sewers, and we've paid for arterials, and we have cost recoveries that help to pay those things back. And there's so much land that hasn't been platted yet. So we have tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure in the ground that we have not recovered the cost for, but then we're looking at building new basins to go out farther, because that's where developers want to be. You can't make them go build in a certain area. But it makes you wonder sometimes, should we slow down and push pause and say, darn it, we're not building another $10 million thing here until you eat up more of this and we recover some of that. At what point do we have too much infrastructure we've built that's just idle, and it's going to take 30 years to recover it?
And I know planning and Public Works are always talking about those items. Where are we going? Where can we go? I guess everything's sewerable at a cost. So where is it reasonable to have sewer services, and where does it really cross the line, because it's such a lift to get it to make it work? And so you hear those conversations and know that they're taking some of that into account, but yet trying to stay ahead of that growth. You have to stay ahead of the growth, and that's where, again, they run these, the enterprise funds run the rate models to make sure that we again don't outrun ourselves, and that we can afford to put this infrastructure in the ground, but yet not hold back some of that organic growth that needs to happen. And so I think it's been a good balance, and will have to be continued to be balanced going forward. And I think the city over the well is overall, if you just look at from our financial situation, has done a good job of that. And I hope we can do that for years and years and years to come.
Well, I am done with my questions, but I have to say, I wouldn't have minded if you threw your hat in the ring for the top job, because you explained things very well. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, but I'm well suited for what I do. I like what I do. I love my job, and passionate about the city, and like where we're going.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Again, I would echo the same comments. Thank you for being in the hot seat this afternoon. I don't think we were too tough, but we appreciate trying to get our heads wrapped around exactly where we're headed. And I think this gives us a good base of where the capital improvement budget was based, at least revenue-wise. And We'll get that, we've got a good base too when the general budget comes out here in a couple weeks. Try to do the time in my head and I messed that up, so.
In a month.
Thank you for being here, and we appreciate it. And you did a nice job earlier as well with the monthly financial update as well. So
I've got a great team behind me. Tim and the rest of the team back at the office do a tremendous job, and we appreciate the conversation. We like what we do. It's a lot of numbers, and it's not just about the numbers. It's talking about the future of the city, and so we appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. It's time now for public input. I'd ask anyone who'd like to speak to approach the podium. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak on any of the fiscal committee's agenda items if anyone is interested. Not everybody at once. We had our first one earlier, so I guess we've set our record. So if there's no one that wishes to give public input, I'm going to adjourn this meeting of the fiscal committee. Thank you.